The invisible guardian, Julian Mercer's fingers danced across his keyboard at 3 a.m., the blue light of his monitor casting sharp shadows across his angular face. At 39, the founder of Horizon Technologies had built an empire worth billions, but sleep remained his most elusive conquest. "Another all-nighter, Mr. Mercer?" Julian didn't look up as Olivia Reed placed a fresh cup of coffee beside his laptop. Her presence at this hour wasn't unusual. As his executive assistant for the past 4 years, she'd adapted to his relentless schedule. "The Singapore deal closes tomorrow," he muttered, reaching for the coffee. "Their legal team sent revisions. Unacceptable ones." Olivia nodded, her chestnut hair pulled back in a practical bun. At 32, she moved through the office with quiet efficiency, a constant satellite to Julian's blazing star. "I've already informed the board about the potential delay, and I've pushed your morning meetings to accommodate the time difference." Julian paused, finally glancing up. "You anticipated this? You mentioned concerns about their counter-proposal yesterday," she said simply. "Better to be prepared." This was their rhythm, his frantic pace, her steady support. What Julian never acknowledged was how Olivia had become the infrastructure of his success, invisible but essential. The next morning arrived without Julian having slept. Olivia found him in the same position, now surrounded by empty coffee cups. She silently cleared them away while briefing him on the day's schedule. "The developers need approval on the interface changes by noon. The investment team has questions about the quarterly projections. And your doctor's office called. You've missed 3 appointments." Julian waved dismissively. "Reschedule the doctor. I need time with the developers." Olivia hesitated. "Sir, that would be your 4th cancellation." "Then find a doctor who works on my schedule," he snapped, immediately regretting his tone. Olivia's expression never changed, but he caught the slight tightening of her shoulders. "Very well." Her voice remained professional, betraying nothing. By midday, Julian had powered through 4 meetings and 2 conference calls. His head throbbed with the beginnings of a migraine, but he ignored it, swallowing more aspirin than he should have. Olivia noticed. She always did. When she brought his lunch, which he hadn't requested, it came with migraine medication and a large bottle of water. "You should eat something with those pills," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "I don't have time to eat," Julian replied, though he did take the medication. "You won't have time to recover from a collapse either," she countered, then immediately looked surprised at her own boldness. Julian's eyebrow raised. Olivia rarely pushed back. "Worried about me, Reed?" "It's my job to worry about everything that affects Horizon," she replied carefully. "You are Horizon's most valuable asset." Something in her practical assessment struck Julian as both accurate and terribly sad. Was that all he was now? An asset? That evening, as the office emptied, Julian paced the conference room, rehearsing his presentation for tomorrow's investors. Olivia appeared in the doorway, coat already on. "Your car is waiting, and I've uploaded the revised presentation to your tablet." Julian nodded absently, still pacing. "I'll be fine. Go home, Reed." She lingered, something uncharacteristic in her hesitation. "When did you last eat today?" Julian paused, genuinely trying to remember. "I had coffee." "Coffee isn't food," Olivia said, setting down her bag and pulling out her phone. "I'm ordering you dinner." "That's not necessary." "With respect, sir, it is." For a moment, her professional mask slipped, revealing genuine concern. "You haven't slept in 36 hours or eaten properly in days. The investors need you sharp tomorrow." Julian wanted to argue, but found he lacked the energy. As he sank into a chair, he realized just how exhausted he truly was. He didn't see the worried glance Olivia cast his way, nor did he understand that. Her concern ran deeper than professional obligation. What Julian Mercer couldn't know was that tomorrow would change everything between them. Tonight was merely the calm before the storm. Shattered invincibility. The boardroom buzzed with anticipation as Julian prepared to unveil Horizon's revolutionary quantum encryption protocol to a panel of Silicon Valley's most influential investors. Despite running on fumes and caffeine, he commanded the room with practiced authority, his voice never betraying the exhaustion that had settled deep in his bones. "Our technology will redefine digital security for the next decade," Julian proclaimed, advancing to the final slide of his presentation. The investors nodded appreciatively, dollar signs practically visible in their eyes. Olivia stood discreetly in the corner, tablet in hand, monitoring Julian's physical state with growing concern. His complexion had taken on an alarming pallor, and she noticed the slight tremor in his hands that others missed. 3 times during the presentation, he'd momentarily lost his train of thought, something unprecedented for the normally laser-focused CEO. As the meeting concluded with handshakes and promises of follow-up conversations, Julian turned to address a question from Patricia Winters, the lead investor. Mid-sentence, he faltered. The room seemed to tilt sideways as a cold sweat broke across his forehead. He gripped the edge of the conference table, knuckles white. "Mr. Mercer?" Patricia's voice sounded distant, underwater. Julian opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His vision tunneled to pinpricks of light. The last thing he registered was Olivia's face, her professional composure fracturing into naked fear as she lunged toward him. Then, darkness. The thunderous crash of Julian's body hitting the floor shattered the room's decorum. For an excruciating moment, everyone froze. Investors, board members, even security, paralyzed by the shocking vulnerability of seeing an invincible man fall, everyone except Olivia. She was at his side before his head hit the ground, moving with instinctive speed that surprised even herself. Cradling his head to prevent further injury, she immediately checked his pulse, rapid but present, while barking orders with an authority that bypassed her usual soft-spoken demeanor. "Call an ambulance, now!" Her voice cut through the stunned silence. "Thomas, get his emergency contact information from my computer. Patricia, please clear the room. He needs air." The security guard, Thomas Reed, blinked in surprise at taking directions from Julian's typically deferential assistant, but moved quickly to comply. Olivia loosened Julian's tie and positioned him in the recovery position, her first aid training overriding her panic. "Julian," she whispered, using his first name for the first time in their 4-year professional relationship. "Stay with me. Help is coming." His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. The shallow rise and fall of his chest was her only reassurance. When the paramedics arrived 7 minutes later, 7 minutes that felt like 7 lifetimes. They found Olivia still kneeling beside him, one hand monitoring his pulse, the other clutching his hand. She provided a detailed account of his symptoms, work hours, and eating habits with clinical precision. "When did he last eat a proper meal?" the lead paramedic asked as they transferred Julian to a stretcher. "Yesterday morning, to my knowledge," Olivia replied, gathering Julian's personal effects. "He's been working for approximately 41 hours straight with minimal breaks. History of migraines, chronically dehydrated, blood pressure issues he refuses to address." The paramedic gave her a knowing look. "You've been keeping track." Olivia didn't respond to that observation. "Which hospital are you taking him to?" "Mercy General." "I'll meet you there." It wasn't a question. As the ambulance doors closed, the boardroom erupted into worried chatter. Patricia Winters approached. Olivia, who was already gathering her things to follow Julian. "I've never seen someone react so quickly in a crisis," Patricia remarked. "You saved him from a serious head injury." Olivia barely registered the compliment. "The board meeting scheduled for tomorrow will need to be postponed. I'll send revised calendar invitations." Patricia studied her with newfound respect. "You really care about him, don't you?" The question caught Olivia off guard. For 4 years, She had maintained perfect professional boundaries, keeping her personal feelings locked behind a wall of efficiency and competence. Now, with Julian's collapse, hairline fractures were spreading through that wall. "Mr. Mercer is essential to Horizon's success," she replied automatically. But even to her own ears, the response sounded hollow. At Mercy General, the emergency room staff worked quickly, hooking Julian up to IVs and monitors while a neurologist examined him. Olivia provided his medical history and insurance information, then settled into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside his bed. The privacy curtain offered only the illusion of separation from the busy ER. When Julian finally regained full consciousness an hour later, his first sight was Olivia, still in her work clothes, fatigue etched into her usually composed features. For a moment, disorientation clouded his expression. "What happened?" His voice came out raspy and weak. "You collapsed during the investor meeting," Olivia explained, helping him sip water through a straw. "The doctor says it's extreme exhaustion, combined with dehydration and low blood sugar. They're running tests to rule out anything more serious." Julian attempted to sit up, wincing. "The investors are all informed and understanding," she finished for him. "Patricia Winters said to tell you that watching the great Julian Mercer become human has only increased their confidence in Horizon's leadership." A wry smile touched his lips. "Became human? Was I an alien before?" "More like a machine," Olivia replied, surprising both of them with her candor. Before Julian could respond, the curtain parted to reveal Dr. Regina Watson, a stern-faced woman, in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and penetrating eyes. "Mr. Mercer, you're awake." "Good." Dr. Watson consulted his chart. "You've been running your body like a sports car with no maintenance. That stops now, or next time it won't be a dramatic boardroom scene. It'll be a funeral." Julian bristled at her bluntness, but Dr. Watson continued unperturbed. "You're severely dehydrated, your electrolytes are dangerously imbalanced, and your body is showing signs of prolonged stress exposure. We're admitting you for at least 48 hours of observation. And treatment?" "That's impossible," Julian protested. "I have meetings, deadlines." "You have nothing if you're dead," Dr. Watson interrupted flatly. "I'm prescribing mandatory rest, proper nutrition, and a complete reassessment of your work habits." As Julian opened his mouth to argue further, Olivia did something unprecedented. She laid her hand gently but firmly on his arm, silencing him with the unexpected physical contact. "I'll handle everything at the office," she said, her quiet voice carrying a new note of resolve. "Your only job right now is to recover." Something in her expression, a complex mixture of professional dedication and something deeper, more personal, made Julian pause. For the first time, he really looked at Olivia, seeing beyond the efficient assistant to the woman who had just witnessed his complete vulnerability and remained steadfastly at his side. 48 hours, he conceded finally, sinking back against the pillows. What neither of them realized was that those 48 hours would be just the beginning of a transformation that would reshape not only Julian's life, but the invisible threads connecting him to the woman who had caught him when he fell. Awakening in white, Julian awoke to unfamiliar silence. No email notifications, no conference calls, no city traffic beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Instead, the rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors and the antiseptic smell of his private room. At Mercy General, sunlight filtered through half-drawn blinds, casting striped shadows across his hospital bed. For a moment, disorientation clouded his thoughts. How long had he been here? The last clear memory was Dr. Watson's stern face and Olivia's unexpected touch on his arm. Olivia. Julian glanced around the room, half expecting to find her still maintaining her vigilant post. Instead, he found a stranger, a man in his early 40s with Mercer's distinctive gray-green eyes, thumbing through a medical journal in the visitor's chair. "Nathaniel?" Julian's voice came out hoarse with disuse. His estranged Brother looked up, setting aside the journal. 5 years of silence stretched between them. A canyon created by their father's contested will and the bitter fight for control of the family's original business before Julian had struck out on his own to found Horizon. The great Julian Mercer laid low, Nathaniel said, though the expected mockery in his tone was tempered by something else. Genuine concern, perhaps. Your assistant called me. Persistent woman. Julian struggled to process this information. Olivia called you? Yesterday. Said family should know, even estranged family. Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably. She was quite persuasive. The idea of soft-spoken Olivia tracking down his brother, whose contact information Julian himself didn't even possess, and convincing him to come was staggering. What else had she done in the 24 hours he'd apparently been unconscious? Before Julian could formulate a response, Dr. Watson entered, clipboard in hand. Good morning, Mr. Mercer. Feeling more human today? Julian assessed himself honestly. The crushing fatigue had receded, replaced by a dull ache throughout his body, as though he'd run a marathon without training. Less like death warmed over, he admitted. Your body is recovering from what amounts to sustained abuse, Dr. Watson said matter-of-factly. Your assistant provided a detailed account of your work habits, 14-hour days, minimal food intake, chronic sleep deprivation. She fixed him with a stern look. It's a recipe for exactly what happened. Complete systemic collapse. Julian frowned. Speaking of my assistant, Ms. Reed left about 2 hours ago after sitting with you all night, Nathaniel supplied. Said she had matters to arrange at your office. Something in his brother's tone made Julian look at him sharply. What else did she say? Nathaniel hesitated. That you're the most brilliant man she's ever known, and the most foolish when it comes to self-preservation. A nurse entered with breakfast, real food, not the IV nutrients that had sustained him, interrupting the conversation. As Julian picked at the bland hospital offerings, Dr. Watson outlined his recovery plan. Minimum 3 days here, then 2. Weeks of restricted work hours. No more than 4 hours daily. Regular meals, 8 hours of sleep nightly, and weekly check-ins with me. Her tone brooked no argument. Your assistant has already confirmed she can enforce this schedule. Julian nearly choked on his toast. Olivia said that? Quite definitively, Dr. Watson replied with the ghost of a smile. She's also arranged for a temporary office to be set up in your home for the restricted work period and implemented what she called delegation protocols at your company. The implications stunned Julian. Olivia had never overstepped her role. Before, had never presumed to make executive decisions in his absence. Yet now she was apparently reorganizing his entire company structure? His indignation must have shown because Nathaniel laughed, a surprisingly genuine sound that momentarily bridged the years between them. She said you'd make exactly that face when you found out, his brother remarked. Said to tell you that Horizon needs its founder alive more than it needs his pride intact. Before Julian could process this, his hospital room door opened again, revealing Olivia herself. She paused upon seeing him awake, a complex emotion flickering across her features before her professional mask slid back into place. Mr. Mercer, she greeted him, nodding politely to Nathaniel and Dr. Watson. It's good to see you conscious. Something had changed. Julian couldn't pinpoint exactly what, but there was a subtle shift in her demeanor, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before, or perhaps had always existed beneath the surface, unnoticed by him. I hear you've been busy, Julian said, an edge in his voice. Just ensuring business continuity during your recovery, she replied evenly, placing his tablet on the bedside table. I've brought a simplified status report on essential matters requiring your input. Everything else has been temporarily reassigned according to the contingency plan. What contingency plan? Julian demanded. The one you approved last year after board member Franklin's heart attack, Olivia reminded him. Section 7.3 of the corporate governance document. In the event of the CEO's temporary incapacitation, operational authority transfers to a management committee comprising the CFO, CTO, and COO, with oversight from the board chairperson. Julian stared at her, vaguely remembering signing off on such a document, but never imagining it would apply to him. And they're following your instructions? They're following the protocols you established, she corrected gently. I'm merely facilitating. Dr. Watson, sensing the tension, excused herself, followed shortly by Nathaniel, who mumbled something about getting coffee. When they were alone, Julian studied Olivia more carefully. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally immaculate appearance showed subtle signs of strain, a wrinkle in her blouse, a strand of hair escaping her customary bun. She had clearly been working non-stop since his collapse. You called my brother, he said finally. Olivia met his gaze unflinchingly. Yes. We haven't spoken in 5 years. I'm aware. She hesitated, then added, family rifts can seem insurmountable until faced with mortality. I thought you might both regret not having the chance to reconcile. The personal insight behind her actions struck Julian like a physical blow. In 4 years, he had never asked about her family, her past, her thoughts on anything, beyond work. Yet she had seen through his carefully constructed walls to the painful estrangement he'd never discussed with anyone at Horizon. You stayed here all night, he continued, processing the pieces of information he'd gathered. Yes. No elaboration. No justification. Why? The question escaped before he could consider its implications. Something flashed in Olivia's eyes, vulnerability quickly masked by professionalism. Because someone needed to be here when you woke up, she said simply. Now, would you like me to brief you on the essential matters requiring your attention, or would you prefer to rest first? Julian found himself at a crossroads, suddenly aware that the woman standing before him was both intimately familiar and a complete mystery. For 4 years, she had existed in his perception solely as an extension of his work, efficient, reliable, nearly invisible in her perfection. Now she had stepped out of those shadows, revealing glimpses of a person with depths he had never bothered to explore. The realization was both humbling and strangely exhilarating. Neither, he decided. Sit down, Olivia. Tell me about yourself. Who you are when you're not managing my life. Her surprise was evident, but after a moment's hesitation, she took the seat Nathaniel had vacated. And as the morning light strengthened in the hospital room, Julian Mercer began the strange, belated process of truly meeting the woman who had been by his side all along. The quiet revolution. When Julian was discharged from the hospital 3 days later, he discovered Olivia had done far more than implement contingency protocols. She had orchestrated a complete revolution in his absence, one so subtle yet profound that he could scarcely grasp its full scope. His penthouse apartment, normally a minimalist showcase he rarely occupied for more than a few sleeping hours, had been transformed. The spare bedroom, previously used for storage, now contained a streamlined home office with everything he might need for his restricted work schedule. The barren refrigerator was stocked with prepared meals labeled by day, a detailed medication. Schedule was magnetized to the door. Your nutritionist collaborated with a meal service, Olivia explained as she guided him through the changes. Everything is portioned and timed according to Dr. Watson's recommendations. Julian surveyed the foreign landscape of his own home. You've been busy. Just doing my job, Olivia replied, though they both recognized this extended far beyond her usual responsibilities. Their conversation in the hospital had shifted something fundamental between them. Julian had listened, truly listened, as Olivia shared fragments of her life story. Her immigration from Taiwan as a child, losing her father to overwork at just 16, putting herself through business school while caring for her mother. The parallels to his own driven nature weren't lost on him, nor was the irony that she had chosen to work for someone replicating her father's self-destructive patterns. The board meeting has been rescheduled for next week, condensed to essential items only, Olivia continued, settling him at his new home workstation. Your 4-hour work window today starts now. I'll be back at noon to ensure you transition to rest time. Julian raised an eyebrow. You're monitoring me now? Doctor's orders, she said, unperturbed. Oh, and Victor Donahue has been attempting to circumvent the protocols. Claims his project can't wait for your recovery. Julian wasn't surprised. Victor, his ambitious VP of product development, had always chafed under Julian's oversight, constantly pushing boundaries in his quest for advancement. What did you tell him? A flicker of something, satisfaction perhaps, crossed Olivia's face. I reminded him that attempting to exploit the CEO's medical condition for project advancement would reflect poorly in his upcoming performance review. Julian couldn't suppress a grin. You threatened him. I clarified expectations, she corrected. Primly, though her eyes held a spark of humor. After she left, Julian examined the carefully organized work she'd prepared, only the most critical decisions requiring his personal attention, everything else neatly delegated or postponed. It was masterfully done, revealing an understanding of Horizon's operations that surprised him. Olivia had always been efficient, but this level of strategic thinking suggested capabilities he'd never fully recognized. Over the following days, Julian adapted to his restricted schedule, partly out of necessity. His body still betrayed him with waves of fatigue, but increasingly out of curiosity. He wanted to understand the systems Olivia had implemented in his absence, the quiet revolution she had engineered while he recovered. What he discovered both impressed and unsettled him. Through careful conversations with his executive team during his limited work hours, Julian learned that Olivia had done more than keep things running. She had improved them. Meetings had been streamlined, communication protocols clarified, decision-making processes optimized. Several executives remarked that the company was operating more efficiently than before his collapse. Reed reorganized the product development workflow, his CTO mentioned during a video conference. Eliminated 3 redundant approval stages that were bottlenecking progress. We're moving 30% faster now. When Julian reviewed the changes, he couldn't find fault with any of them. They were all adjustments he might have made himself, if he'd ever slowed down enough to see the inefficiencies. 1 week into his recovery, Julian received an unexpected visit from Patricia Winters, the lead investor from the fateful meeting. You're looking better, she observed, settling into his living room with the ease of someone accustomed to accessing restricted spaces. Your assistant said you had a free hour in your recovery schedule. Julian noted with irony that even his visitors now required Olivia's approval. Patricia, what brings you here? Curiosity, she replied candidly. And a proposition. She explained that after witnessing both his collapse and the subsequent seamless operation of Horizon under the contingency plan, the investment group had developed a new perspective. We've been watching how your company functions with you working just 4 hours daily, Patricia said. The results are impressive. Your executive team is stepping up, making decisions independently within the frameworks you've established. And your assistant? She paused. Olivia Reed is remarkable. The way she's orchestrating everything, anticipating issues before they arise. Julian felt an unexpected surge of pride at the praise of Olivia, followed by a twinge of something less comfortable. Had he been holding Horizon back with his controlling tendencies? Patricia leaned forward. Our proposition is this. We want to increase our investment, with one condition. This new operating model becomes permanent. You focus on vision and strategy. Your team handles execution. 4 to 6 hours daily from you, maximum. The old Julian would have rejected the idea outright. His company, his control. But the man who had collapsed in that boardroom was being reassembled differently during this recovery. Priorities shifting, perspectives changing. "I'll consider it," he said, surprising himself. After Patricia left, Julian sat in unaccustomed stillness, contemplating the revolution that had begun with his fall. Olivia had created a version of Horizon, and by extension a version of himself that functioned better with limits, with balance, with delegation. The realization struck him with unexpected force. She had saved more than his health. She had saved him from himself. When Olivia arrived later that afternoon to review his schedule for the following day, Julian studied her with new awareness. "You've been running my company," he said, not as an accusation, but as a recognition. Olivia met his gaze steadily. "I've been preserving your company while you heal," she corrected. "There's a difference. Patricia Winters seems to think you're doing more than preserving." Something flashed in Olivia's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or concern that she had overstepped. The protocols were designed to be temporary. "What if they weren't?" Julian asked. "What if this becomes the new normal? Me, focusing on vision and strategy. You—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "You, continuing to be the infrastructure that makes everything work." "That would depend," Olivia said carefully, "on whether this is just another way of maintaining your workaholic tendencies through proxy, or a genuine recognition that Horizon benefits from your brilliant vision without requiring your constant control." Her insight was startling and accurate. Julian found himself smiling ruefully. "When did you start understanding me so well?" "I've always understood you, Mr. Mercer," Olivia replied quietly. "You just never noticed I was paying attention." In that moment, with afternoon light casting her profile in gold, Julian realized the revolution wasn't just in how Horizon operated or how he worked. The most profound change was in how he saw the woman who had been beside him all along, not as an extension of his will, but as a force of her own, equal in her own right. And with that recognition came a question he had never thought to ask before. What did Olivia Reed want for herself? Foundations. Rebuilt, the day Julian returned to Horizon's headquarters marked exactly 3 weeks since his collapse. The glass and steel building reflected morning sunlight as his driver pulled up to the entrance, where Olivia waited on the steps. "Welcome back, Mr. Mercer," she greeted him, professional as always, but with a warmth that had emerged during his recovery. Julian noticed the subtle changes in her appearance. A more confident posture, a touch of color in her usually understated attire. Or perhaps these weren't changes at all, just aspects of Olivia he'd finally learned to see. "The executive team is gathered in the visioning room, not the boardroom," she informed him as they walked through the lobby. Employees stared openly, some offering tentative smiles or nods of acknowledgement. Julian realized with a start that he'd rarely interacted with most of them before his collapse. "The visioning room?" he questioned. "We never used that space. Thought a change of venue would help signal a change in approach," Olivia explained. "The room's design encourages collaborative thinking rather than top-down directives." Julian hid a smile. Even his return was being stage-managed with Olivia's characteristic thoughtfulness. "And the board?" "We'll join via video conference for the second half of the meeting after you've established the new operational framework with your direct reports." As they reached the elevator, Julian pressed the hold button, creating a moment of privacy. "Before we go up there, I want to thank you, Olivia. Not just for keeping Horizon running, but for—" He hesitated, unused to expressing gratitude. "For seeing what I couldn't see about myself." Olivia's composure slipped momentarily, revealing genuine emotion before she recovered. "I was just doing my job." "No," Julian said firmly. "What you did went far beyond your job description." You rebuilt the foundation of this company and of its founder, while everyone was looking elsewhere. That deserves recognition. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, cutting short her response. As they walked toward the visioning room, Julian noticed a new addition to the space outside his office. A second desk, elegant and proportional to his own. "What's this?" he asked, pausing. Olivia followed his gaze. "Part of the restructuring. As chief of staff, I'll need a workspace commensurate with increased responsibilities." Julian turned to her, surprised. "Chief of staff? When was this decided?" "It's in the proposal you'll be presenting today," she replied, a hint of uncertainty crossing her features. "Unless you've reconsidered the recommendations we discussed during your recovery?" The recommendations, including Patricia Winter's suggestion that Julian limit his direct involvement to strategic vision while empowering his executive team for day-to-day operations. Central to this new structure was elevating Olivia from executive assistant to chief of staff, formalizing the leadership role she had effectively been performing behind the scenes for years. "I haven't reconsidered," Julian assured her. "I just didn't realize the implementation had already begun." Olivia's expression relaxed slightly. "Preliminary steps only. Everything awaits your final approval." The visioning room was arranged differently than Julian remembered from his infrequent visits. The massive oval table remained, but the formerly sterile space now featured living plants, improved lighting, and walls covered with vision boards and strategic frameworks, many featuring ideas Julian recognized as his own, extracted from conversations he barely remembered having. His executive team rose as he entered, familiar faces viewing him with new eyes after witnessing his human frailty. Victor Donahue, the ambitious VP who had tried to circumvent Olivia's protocols, stood slightly apart, his expression guarded. "Thank you all for your exceptional work during my absence," Julian began, taking his place at the head of the table. What could have been a crisis for Horizon, instead, became an opportunity for growth and restructuring. He outlined the new organizational model, emphasizing the shift from centralized control to distributed leadership. As he spoke, Julian watched his executives' reactions. Relief from some, wariness from others, particularly Victor, whose sphere of influence would be more constrained under the new checks and balances. "And finally," Julian concluded, "these changes require a new position to ensure cohesion across departments and initiatives. I'm pleased to announce Olivia Reed's promotion to Chief of Staff, effective immediately." Olivia, who had been quietly taking notes beside him, looked up in surprise at the effective immediately amendment to their discussed timeline. Several executives nodded approval. They had witnessed her capabilities firsthand during Julian's absence, while Victor's frown deepened. "With respect," Victor interjected, "shouldn't such a critical position be filled through a formal search process? Ms. Reed has been an excellent assistant, but Chief of Staff requires strategic vision and leadership experience. The old Julian would have shut down the challenge with corporate authority. The rebuilt Julian recognized the value of transparency." "An excellent question, Victor," he acknowledged. "In fact, Ms. Reed has been functioning as de facto Chief of Staff for years, though neither of us recognized it until recently. During my absence, she demonstrated not just administrative competence, but strategic insight that many of you experienced firsthand." Julian turned to Olivia. "Perhaps you could share your assessment of the Singapore acquisition strategy. The executive team should understand your thinking process." If Olivia was startled by being put on the spot, she recovered quickly. With measured confidence, she outlined concerns about the Singapore deal that Julian himself had only vaguely sensed. Regulatory hurdles, integration challenges, cultural misalignments. Her analysis was precise, insightful, and delivered with a quiet authority that silenced even Victor's objections. As the meeting progressed into the board presentation, Julian found himself watching Olivia with newfound admiration. She had always been his shadow, anticipating needs before he expressed them. Now she was stepping into the light, revealing capabilities that had been hidden in plain sight. When the marathon meeting finally concluded late afternoon, the board had unanimously approved the restructuring, including Olivia's promotion with a compensation package that made Julian wince at how underpaid she had been previously. The executive team filtered out, leaving Julian and Olivia alone in the visioning room. Through the glass walls, the sun was beginning to set over the city skyline, painting the space in amber hues. "Effective immediately?" Olivia questioned, allowing herself a small smile. Julian shrugged. "Why wait for something we both know is right?" He stood, moving to the wall where someone, Olivia, he presumed, had mounted a framed copy of Horizon's original mission statement, handwritten by Julian on a coffee shop napkin 6 years earlier. "Technology that expands human potential without diminishing human connection." "I'd forgotten this," he admitted, touching the frame. "Somewhere along the way, I focused on the first part and neglected the second." Olivia joined him, studying the faded napkin. "It's not too late to reconnect with your original vision." "Thanks. To you." Julian turned to face her directly. "You know, when I collapsed, people saw it as weakness. The invincible Julian Mercer brought low. But I've come to see it differently. That moment stripped away everything except what matters most." "And what matters most?" Olivia asked quietly. "Connection, purpose beyond profit. The people who stand beside you, not because they have to, but because they choose to." Julian hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I never thanked you properly for staying with me in the hospital, for calling Nathaniel, for seeing what I needed when I couldn't see it myself." "You don't need to thank me for caring, Julian," she said, using his first name naturally now. "That was never part of my job description. That was always my choice." The simple honesty of her statement struck him deeply. For years, he had surrounded himself with people who wanted something from him: his brilliance, his connections, his wealth. Olivia wanted nothing except his well-being, had asked for nothing even as she reconstructed his company and his life. "Have dinner with me tonight," Julian said suddenly. Not as CEO and chief of staff, not as boss and employee, just as Julian and Olivia. Two people getting to know each other properly for the first time. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by something warmer. "I'd like that," she said simply. As they gathered their things to leave the visioning room, Julian noticed a small plaque that had been added beside the door, bearing a quote he didn't recognize. "The strongest foundations are rebuilt, not merely repaired." "Your addition?" he asked, gesturing to the plaque. Olivia nodded. "A reminder that sometimes we need to fall apart completely before we can be reconstructed into something better." Julian considered this as they walked together toward the elevator, their steps naturally falling into rhythm. The collapse that had seemed like his greatest weakness had revealed his greatest strength, not in the form of resilience or business acumen, but in the form of the remarkable woman beside him, who had always seen his true potential, even when he was blind to it himself. The foundations had been rebuilt, stronger than before, and on this new foundation, something profound was beginning to take shape, something that transcended business titles and corporate hierarchies, something that began with a fall and continued with the quiet revolution of being truly seen. As the elevator doors closed, Julian Mercer, reformed workaholic, humbled visionary, grateful friend, smiled at the future unfolding before him. It looked nothing like the future he had once imagined. It looked infinitely better.